Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX. Well, let's take a look at some of the top stories. 8 trucks have begun moving from Egypt into Gaza, reported by Egyptian state-affiliated Al Qahira News, amid escalating international pressure to address worsening starvation within the Gaza Strip. Israel has announced new humanitarian corridors and pauses to enable United Nations aid deliveries into densely populated areas. Israel has now resumed airdropping aid into Gaza, according to Israeli military. Meanwhile, the death toll from yesterday's Israeli attacks on Gaza have now reached 240 people, according to Gaza's Civil Defense Agency. The US President Donald Trump has announced that Thailand and Cambodia have agreed to hold immediate ceasefire talks after 3 days of deadly border clashes that have left over 30 dead. According to reports, Thailand's acting Prime Minister Phumtham Vechayachai expressed conditional support, while ASEAN Chair Anwar Ibrahim and the UN has voiced readiness to assist in the ending this conflict. Protesters rallied while US President Donald Trump played golf under tight security. This comes amid his 4-day visit to the United Kingdom. Ukrainian drone debris has disrupted railway power supply in Russia's Volgograd region, according to local authorities cited by Governor Andrei Bocharov. No injuries were reported following the attack. However, this marks another strike deep inside of the Russian territory. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said that the easing of restriction on US beef imports was not triggered by President Donald Trump. He says the curbs in place since 2003 over mad cow disease concerns were lifted independently of recent trade talks. Taiwan's largest ever recall election has failed to remove any of the 24 opposition Kuomintang lawmakers targeted. Recall supporters criticized the KMT for being too close to China, while the party defended its position as maintaining open communication. The Foreign Minister of United Arab Emirates has said that it will also join in on airdropping aid into Gaza. However, UNRWA chief warns that airdropping aids will not be enough to stop the shortage of food, as hunger looms and situations are dire in the Gaza Strip. Israel's military has said that it airdropped humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, amid mounting international pressure and warnings from relief agencies of starvation spreading there. This comes as 8 trucks have begun moving from Egypt into Gaza, according to Egyptian news outlets. According to reports, the drop included 7 packages of aid containing flour, sugar, and canned food. The move followed announcements by the United Arab Emirates, which said it would resume its own airdrops into Gaza, and Britain said it would work with partners, including Jordan, to assist them. Following these announcements, Israel's military has said that airdrops of aid to Gaza would resume overnight, and that it would establish humanitarian corridors to guarantee safe transport for UN convoys of food as well as medicines. Now we're joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratna. He's an international security expert, joins us live from Ankara, Turkey. Thank you, Professor Rohan, for joining us today. Good to see you. So how effective and sustainable are humanitarian airdrops compared to ground aid routes?
The problem, Asuma, has always been not that there is no aid, there is enough aid, but the distribution of aid to the civilian population in Gaza, because Israel constantly said that Hamas is misusing the humanitarian relief and aid. So this time, a number of countries, especially UAE, has agreed, and they have started now to airdrop aid into the population centers. Of course, Hamas will still take a percentage of the humanitarian and relief supplies, but this operation will create the first step of distributing the aid to the population. So I believe that this is the right step in order to address looming humanitarian crisis.
And Professor, now how did these coordinated efforts of countries like UAE, UK, and Jordan reflect broader international consensus or division on handling these Gaza crisis?
International consensus is now very clear. Number one is Hamas has rejected, because Hamas has rejected the ceasefire proposal, and Trump has given the go ahead for the Israelis to dismantle Hamas. So, international consensus, although they may not voice it, is that Hamas should go. There should be a post Hamas stage. Hamas is not surrendering, Hamas is not disarming, and Hamas is not releasing the hostages. So the international position is very clear. They are looking at a post Hamas Gaza, and they will discreetly, silently, they will support Israel's campaign to dismantle Hamas. But the international community really wants aid and assistance given to the Palestinian people. There is a humanitarian crisis, there's a human rights and a humanitarian issue, according to a number of countries, especially in Europe, and they want to see this issue as being addressed. But today, the United States has given the green light to Israel to take military action. So we will see stepped up military operations on the part of IDF against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the other terrorist groups that created this devastating war after mounting that attack on October 7th and 8th, 2023. This is the reality of the situation today.
And Professor, now do you think, are we seeing a new model of multilateral humanitarian response towards Gaza?
You are absolutely correct. What we have seen is that Israel itself has agreed to this proposal of airdropping aid, because the issue has always been distribution, not lack of aid. So Israel itself is moving that direction. I believe that the United States will play a very important role to ensure that while there are counterterrorism operations against the threat entities, in parallel there will be sufficient food and medicine and other relief items that will move to Gaza, and the UN also will start playing an important role.
Yes, we'll be keeping an eye on this. Professor, please stay with us as we'll come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, Gaza's Civil Defense Agency says 40 people were killed in an Israeli attack on Saturday. The war in Gaza has lasted more than 21 months now. Spokesman Mahmoud Basal said 9 people died in 3 airstrikes on Gaza City. 13 others were killed near Khan Yunis, including 8 at a camp for displaced people in Al-Mawasi. 2 people died in a drone strike on Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. The agency also said 14 people were shot dead while waiting for aid in 6 different areas. 1 man was killed northwest of Gaza City, where reportedly thousands had gathered near a distribution point close to an Israeli military post. The Israeli army said it fired warning shots at a crowd after seeing a threat. It said it did not know any of casualties. 1 man was also killed by a drone near Khan Yunis and another by artillery in Al-Burej. Basal also said teams recovered 12 bodies after strikes in north of Rafah. Israel has launched its military campaign in Gaza after a deadly attack by Hamas on October 7, 2023. The Israeli campaign has killed over 59,700 Palestinians, mostly civilians, according to the health ministry, in the Hamas-run territory. We go back to our guest discussion with Professor Rohan Gunaratna. He's an international security expert. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, how credible are the differing narratives between Gaza's civil defense reports and the Israeli military claims regarding warning shots and intent of these casualties?
There are two narratives about the developments in Gaza. You know this very well. And the first narrative is one of the Hamas run health ministry of the fatalities and casualties. Certainly, there are civilian deaths, there is no doubt about it. But the intention of IDF is not to kill Palestinians. The intention of the IDF is to rescue its citizens and foreign nationals who were kidnapped. 251 were kidnapped by Hamas, PIJ, and other terrorist entities in 2023. But because Hamas has built an underground city and because Hamas is seeking shelter and refuge and hiding beneath mosques, churches, hospitals, schools, we have seen that when Israel strikes back, there are civilian deaths. So the responsibility for this devastation rests primarily on Hamas and the other terrorist entities and their sponsors. That must be made very clear. But unfortunately, the propaganda and the disinformation, the misinformation campaign suggests that Israel is deliberately killing civilians. We are not seeing any standing army in the world will ever do that. Of course, all conflicts in the world produce civilian deaths and casualties. Unfortunately, in Gaza, a very large number of civilians have died compared to the number of terrorists who have been killed. That is the reality of the conflict on the ground.
And Professor, now looking back, and we both have had many discussions on this, but how can there be trust? How can there be trust between these parties, all of these parties involved? As we've seen UN accused Israel, Israel accused UN, and continuing of these casualties. How can they trust each other moving forward?
What is important is to build that trust, because that trust has been eroded based on the Israeli investigations. Some local staff hired by the UN to work in Gaza also served in the rank and file of Hamas and other threat entities. So the trust has been eroded between Israel and the United Nations. United Nations is an organization that has dedicated its entire resources towards uplifting the suffering of the people. And this relationship has to be restored, although there can be such instances where UN has been used, misused, and abused by threat entities, and this has happened not only in Gaza but around the world in many other conflict zones. So what is important is for the UN to screen its recruits and to continuously screen its staff working in conflict zones if they are sympathizers, supporters of terrorist entities. If that can be done, certainly such disputes will not occur. But in the coming phase, I can assure you that the UN will play a very important role in the distribution of aid and relief supplies to Gaza, because that is the plan of the international community.
Thank you for sharing that. Please stay with us, Professor. Now we move on to our next news. Thousands of Israelis marched towards the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza to secure the safe return of all hostages now held in the Palestinian enclave. Protesters also gathered at Tel Aviv's Hostages Square, urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the U.S. administration to negotiate a deal to end the war. This comes as truce talks remain stalled, with the U.S. accusing Hamas of failing to act in good faith in these negotiations. The war in Gaza has been raging for around 21 months, with such demonstrations now a regular sight in Tel Aviv. Protesters have also been calling for Netanyahu to step down over his handling of this war. Let's listen in to what some Israeli protesters had to say.
The most immediate message is stop the war, stop starving Gaza. And the message for the people around me is refuse to take part at this war, and refuse to serve this government, or refuse to serve.
I'm demonstrating against our government, against the war, to stop the war crimes, and get the hostages back home, sign a deal, and get rid of this horrible, terrifying government.
End the war because we don't need to be there. We did enough. They suffer, we suffer. I don't want one soldier to be wounded or to die for actually nothing. And this won't bring our hostages back. So we have to end the war, bring them tomorrow over here.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Rohan Gunaratna. He joins us from Ankara, Turkey. Professor, thank you for staying with us. Now, with truce talks stalled and the US blaming Hamas for a lack of progress, but still it's ongoing and the war is on, it goes on. What's your reaction to people demonstrating in Tel Aviv and now increasing their voices?
I have seen the videos and the images of the demonstrations against Netanyahu and against the IDF from continuing operations in Gaza by the Israeli community. And this community has steadfastly grown. And it is very likely that this community will continue to voice their concerns because they see that by war, looking at past IDF operations, they were not successful in rescuing the hostages. So they believe that only a peace deal will ensure the return of those remaining 52, 53 hostages, of which Israeli government believe more than half has been killed. So it is very likely that Netanyahu, now that he has received the green light from the United States, will step up operations against Hamas, but it is also almost certain that no hostages will come out live because in a military situation, most of those remaining hostages will be killed in the coming weeks and coming months.
Yes, and Professor, now, so US and Israel have blamed Hamas for lack of progress in their stalled talks. What diplomatic tools still remain in bringing both sides back to the table now?
Qatar continues to engage Hamas. Egypt engages Hamas with the intention of bringing them of getting them to negotiate sincerely and genuinely. In fact, Qatar itself is very disappointed with the Hamas thinking on this issue. Hamas doesn't want to release all the hostages because Hamas knows the moment they are released, Hamas will be dismantled. So Hamas wants to protract the war in Gaza by holding on to the hostages. But I believe that Qatar and Egypt and other countries have put sufficient pressure on Hamas, but Hamas is unwilling. That is why the US said to Netanyahu to go ahead and do the military option. But this military option is not going to free the hostages. The hostages will be killed by Hamas. We have seen a number of hostage deaths at the hand of Hamas and also at the hands of military operations. So I think that what is important is the talks with Hamas to continue while IDF mounts operations. Of course, in parallel with that, there should be flow of aid to the Gazans in Palestine.
Yes, we hope that diplomatic talks will not stall and the window will be kept open. Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Gunaratna, for joining us all the way from Turkey today. Now we move on to our next news. US President Donald Trump has announced that Thailand and Cambodia have agreed to meet immediately and work out a ceasefire. Trump, who has been actively engaged in peace talks, said both nations are looking to end the violence and return to the negotiating table for future trade agreements. He also mentioned that when peace is secured, he looks forward to concluding trading deals with both countries. Meanwhile, Thailand's acting Prime Minister Phuntham Wechayachai has expressed willingness to engage in dialogue. He confirmed that Thailand agrees in principle to a ceasefire but emphasized the need to see sincere intention from Cambodia. Phuntham also called for bilateral talks to resolve the conflict swiftly. On the Cambodian side, Prime Minister Hun Manet welcomed Trump's intervention. He stated that Cambodia is ready to discuss the ceasefire and confirmed that the country's foreign ministers will coordinate with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to negotiate with Thailand. However, Cambodia's defense ministry condemned Thailand's actions, labeling them as aggression. Let's have a look at what the spokeswoman of Cambodia's defense ministry had to say.
មកទល់ពេលនេះទាហានថៃនៅបន្តឆ្លៀតពៀនមកលើទឹកដីកម្ពុជាយ៉ាងកំរោលនិងគ្មានញញើតនឹងច្បាប់អន្តរជាតិដោយពង្រីកការឆ្លៀនពៀនទៅទិសព្រះវិហារឧត្តរមានជ័យនិងខេត្តពោធិ៍សាត់និងខេត្តបន្ទាយមានជ័យនិងបានប្រើប្រាស់អាវុធធុនធ្ងន់ផ្លោងចូលទឹកដីកម្ពុជាយ៉ាងសាហាវឃោឃៅកោតទោសយ៉ាងដាច់អហង្ការចំពោះទង្វើឆ្លៀនពៀនប្រដាប់អាវុធរបស់កងកម្លាំងយោធាថៃដែលជាការគំរាមកំហែងយ៉ាងធ្ងន់ធ្ងរមិនត្រឹមតែដល់សន្តិភាពស្ថិរភាពនៅតាមបណ្ដាព្រំដែនកម្ពុជាប៉ុណ្ណោះទេប៉ុន្តែប៉ះពាល់ដល់សន្តិភាពស្ថិរភាពនៅក្នុងតំបន់ទាំងមូលកម្ពុជាសូមបញ្ជាក់ជំហរសារជាថ្មីម្ដងទៀតថាកម្ពុជាគឺជាជនរងគ្រោះនៃការឈ្លានពានរបស់
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He's an international communications strategist, joins us live from Thailand. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. So now Thailand's acting Prime Minister has called for, in his words, sincere intention. Is there like a trust issue here? How realistic is that for both nations to genuinely commit to a ceasefire soon?
I think, first of all, thank you very much for contacting me again today this morning.
Thank you.
And let me just clarify one thought that I have in my mind about the current situation, that there is a international pressure on both countries, Thailand and Cambodia, especially from China and US. As you know that Trump administration, they always jump in with the call for ceasefire and some kind of a discussion between both countries that if you don't do the ceasefire, we'll stop trading between both countries from the U.S. and other countries also. I think the intervention of the China and United States is quite influential in this, especially in Southeast Asia. And there will be an impact of that soon. And I think both countries are showing willingness to come on the dialogue table. And but as I said in the past also on this channel, that there is no immediate resolution that we can come out between both countries. But yes, ceasefire can be implemented immediately. But I hear the news recently on the TV now in the morning as well, that despite of Trump intervention for ceasefire, there is still some military clash from the Cambodia side is happening now. That's what claimed by the Thai. But I think now the question comes to your question now. The trust will not develop overnight actually, because the both countries have been in conflict, clash, military clash, and diplomatic clash for many years actually. So I think it will take some time to build trust here.
And Dr. Sanjay, now, what are the potential obstacles in building this trust? You mentioned that it's not doable, in a night, Yeah,
I think the first thing that I can see that ASEAN is a very potential region. And both countries belong to the ASEAN administration as well, and I saw that the both countries, Cambodia and Thailand, they both have reported the recent developments to the ASEAN chair, which is Malaysia. So I think we have to use this ASEAN vehicle to get a very close understanding about the situation, and instead of relying on the intervention of America and China, I think the most successful model that can be implemented in this crisis of time through the ASEAN member network, actually, because there is more influential and more appropriate action that can be taken through the ASEAN. That is what I see at the moment. But in the long run, yes, we need all parties come on the table, discuss, and try to resolve the problem.
Yes.
But immediately now, the ASEAN is the big potential here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay Kumar, for joining us and sharing your expertise as international communication strategist. Now we move on to our next news. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is set to meet US President Donald Trump to clinch a trade deal for Europe. According to reports, the deal would likely see a 15% baseline tariff on most EU goods, but end months of certainty for EU companies. Trump has said that there was a 50-50 chance that the US and the 27-member European Union could reach a framework trade pact and stated that Brussels wanted to make a deal very badly. This comes as US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick departed for Washington for Scotland to engage in high-level talks with EU officials. The EU faces US tariffs on more than 70% of its exports, with 50% on steel and aluminum, 25% in cars and car parts, and a 10% levy on most other EU goods. Trump has said he would hike the rate to 30% on August 1st. A level EU official said would wipe out whole chunks of transatlantic commerce. Now we're joined by Dr. Ajay Dua. She's a former Secretary of Commerce, senior economist. Thank you, Dr. Ajay, for joining us today. Good to see you. Thank you. Now, Trump has stated that Brussels wants to make a deal very badly. So how much influence does political will play in these high-stakes trade negotiations?
I think an agreement between the United States and EU is absolutely essential because both sides are the biggest trading partners of the other. The trade between the US and the 27 European Union countries is humongous, some $600 billion a year. The complementarity between them is across the board, both in manufacturing as well as in trading. So I think there is urgency, great amount of urgency, that the two arrive at a deal. The very fact that the president of the EU, she's flying to Scotland, where the president is currently at Danbury, as well as he's called his Secretary of Commerce Lutnick to be there. And soon thereafter, he is also going to be meeting Sir Keir Starmer, the UK Premier. So the scene is all set, and as far as the EU is concerned, its president, she's already said that now the ball is in the court of President Trump. That means we have negotiated and we would like things to now come about quickly. You know, there is a deadline of 1st of August. Unless an agreement is arrived, the 30% tariff which President Trump had imposed earlier on the EU items, on EU for several items of import, that kicks in. So that's one urgency. And second is the fact that EU also must realize that President Trump, transactional as he is been deeply concerned that for the defense of Europe or EU as a whole, the US has been spending a lot of money, including in the Ukraine war, and that he needs to get some revenue apart from their taking away a part of the cost of the Ukraine assistance. He also is wanting to make some money by way of duties. So the compromise there, the EU seems to be ready to accept a 15% duty and exemption on certain items which the US needs badly from them. They are in aviation, pharmaceutical, medical devices, several spirits, certain manufactured goods. But the question is, along with this 30% duty, Mr. Trump is also has imposed a 50% duty on European steel and aluminium, and as well as around the world. So he would need to be reasonable. The two sides can do it, and I hope that it's good since it's good for world trade and for all the economies of the world, because everybody trades with EU or the US. That comes out quickly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajay, for joining us today and sharing your insight. Now, well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.